Welcome, everybody. My name is Matt Hooper. I'm the ITSM Evangelist from LANDESK. It is my pleasure to be with you today, presenting here on this Bright Talk for DevOps. I hope your summit has been going really well. I'm excited to present today. The topic that I'm going to be prepared for you and the information I'm going to share with you is around IT service management from two different perspectives. One is from a controlling the organization and preventing certain types of failures from happening and trying to get arms around capacity and availability and those type of concepts. And the other one is being more disruptive, how we can help the market change its direction. So it's exciting to present this information to you today. I have prepared the title of this presentation as Battle Royale, DevOps versus ITIL in the ITSM space. I don't really see it that way, but I think it's kind of a fun way to present it. There are certainly a lot of personalities and a lot of opinions and strong feelings towards DevOps versus ITIL, what ITIL is, what ITIL is supposed to be. I feel very much sometimes like I'm shaking up someone's religious faith when I talk about some of the DevOps principles. I hope to do it in a professional way and share with you what it's going to take for us to change the way that we look at IT service management. But in essence, really, IT service management, to me and to many of my colleagues, and the way that I think most CIOs view IT service management, it's not about a framework, it's not about processes. IT service management is the way that IT activities get accomplished, whether human or machine, and we have to learn how to manage these in an effective way to support the digital economy in which we're moving towards. And when you look at this digital transformation that all businesses are driving towards, it truly does require us to reimagine the way that business supports that business digital strategy. So to a large extent of that, our ITSM solutions need to focus on that same type of approach. So we have to think, how are we being viewed at by the business, with the business, and is IT not really even the business itself, with so many companies now really going to market with pure IT services. So let's start off a little bit with some perspective here. ITIL sees IT sort of in this fashion. It very specifically, and some people have argued with me, ITIL doesn't see it this way, but not to quote chapter and verse, but there are very specifically defined two customers. There is an internal customer and an external customer. And so in this world, there's that customer that the business is responding to, and there's a bunch of different departments inside there that are supporting that external customer. And then there's information technology that really supports every single one of those departments. In fact, if you look at it, information technology is the one department that is utilized across the organization. It has a view into every aspect of how that business operates, but yet there's that customer relationship still involved there. And this puts IT a little bit separate. You can kind of see it in this picture here, that IT is separate from the business. And that's one of the first challenges that ITIL has to overcome, and those who are implementing ITIL in their approach, in their workshops, as they're planning their processes, as they're defining their metrics, as they're building their reports, as they're creating interfaces, they are taking somewhat of this approach, that there's this internal customer, and they're focused on this customer relationship. Customer relationship is exceptionally important, but the organization has to try to really think about how it views itself. Most businesses don't see IT in that fashion. Businesses usually see IT like this, that we have a bunch of suppliers that we utilize to get our goods and services, and then through those goods and services, we apply our intellectual property, we apply our competitive market advantage, and we provide our domain expertise on top of those capabilities to then service a market, to then have our customers. And it's in this fashion that it's naturally an inclination that organizations want IT to be less of this monolithic type of department with all of these controls in place and to be more business-centric. It's why for the past who knows how many years, 10, 15, 20, 25 years, we've heard this mantra of aligning IT and business. Well, the reality is that same mantra has been spoken for aligning HR in the business, aligning sales in the business, aligning marketing in the business, aligning legal in the business. Every internal provider of certain domain expertise, whether it be sales, marketing, customer service, finance, legal, or IT, has a skill. And those skills, when applied, create business value. And so we need to kind of rethink and reimagine, well, where are those skills coming from today? Because the reality is we have a different view of the world. So if we look at kind of some of the traditional thinking in the way that we look at the way we define ourselves and how we define ourselves, first thing is when it comes to the customer, that's a really important definition. Knowing who and what our customer is exceptionally important for us to stay focused on priority, risk, controls. A customer differentiates from a business stakeholder, someone who has actual ownership of a business. In fact, it is the imperative and the right of a business owner to do something that could hurt a customer if it's in the best interest of the business. Because actually, if a business becomes unviable because of over-servicing a customer, that doesn't help any of its customers. And any business owner knows and has an expression, sometimes you have to fire your customer. So right off the bat, if IT doesn't have this perspective of who they're truly working with and for, that they are the business, they have a business imperative to stay viable and protect themselves, and they service truly an end customer, that then changes the way in which they look at who's making requests and how they respond to them. It also changes the way that they look at themselves. So they recognize in the kind of this DevOps thinking that there's only one customer and they don't work for this company, and that IT is not a department but a capability, and that we don't need 3 different groups to get involved here on assessing requirements, validating the functional aspects of this capability, and then pushing it to market. That we can change the way that we operate by leaning down and working more collaboratively. And that is not necessarily IT and the business, but it's IT is the business. And we see this in countless different business models. If you think of just Uber, for instance, Uber is one of the largest fleet services in the world, or probably is the largest fleet service in the world. It doesn't own a single car. They're completely a technology business, right? So IT is the business at Uber. But you don't think of Uber as an IT company. You think of them as a fleet service, as a carrier service. So that changes the way your perspective is and how you operate. And so now when you're making these projects and you're putting these actions in place, you're not thinking they're IT projects. You recognize for truly what they are, which is business projects. And that's really all we really want to have inside of an organization is business projects. If it is a business project for a business imperative, it then changes the way in which we're supporting that digital strategy. And it changes the way we look at ourselves in IT, and we recognize that we're an enabler of this digital strategy, that we're not a service provider. So there's some language inside of ITIL that needs to change. And when you rethink about the value you bring to the table as an IT professional and what you're creating with inside of IT, sometimes when you go to these conferences and people are talking about customer from an internal perspective, they're talking about these groups of stakeholders, and they're talking about PMO development and operations, and they're talking about IT being a service provider and the service value supply chains. It can almost be frustrating. It can almost be frustrating listening to that because it's demoralizing. It is to me as an IT professional. I don't want to hear that anymore. I want to change the language because the reality is that we have all this capability of IT services that usually don't exist inside of IT, the department, right? Because IT is not a department. IT truly is a capability. And it's this capability that is changing and showing the value for which the business can create new opportunities and be disruptive in the market. So if we look at IT for truly what it is, which is a competency, our processes then change. Our methodologies change. The way we look at controls and risk and innovation and disruption change and need to operate collaboratively. So let's take a look at what I call traditionally the water-fail methodology. We go through these series of siloed approaches, a very linear thought process where the business is going to gather its requirements. Part of an IT department is going to build it and test it, and someone will release it, and then there's the operations team that's operating it. We'll have incidents, and we have to resolve these things. We're going to try to build knowledge. Well, the reality is we're asking a ton of different questions. And these questions don't always exist in the manner in which they used to exist or we thought they existed. The thought and the fact that the business has the requirements and the business knows requirements and they own the requirements is not a fact. In fact, it's a myth. The business doesn't usually know what the market wants to do. They don't know how the true end customer is going to interact with technology. So the organization thus must need to become a learning organization. They must be ready to test markets and fail. And as they're building these things, they need to understand the complexity in the systems in which true technology services are provided. And then the validation process. But if you look at it today, these exist in a plethora of tools that are completely disconnected, managed by silo teams. Again, PMO, the development team, the operations teams, they're in different groups with different tools and different sets of data and different reporting. And you have to ask yourself, with all of this going on, how does anybody figure out how stuff gets done and how to keep it running? Well, that's the one process ITIL doesn't talk about, which is praying. And those of us who worked in IT operations know that we spend a lot of time on this process. We pray this release is going to go well. We pray this didn't break anything. We pray that change we just made didn't cause an outage for somebody else. We pray that we're not going to have to get pulled into a post-mortem review meeting tomorrow, right? And so if we look at that, it changes the process thinking versus systems thinking. Are we learning? Do we understand the complexity of the systems? And do the systems provide us data that we can analyze and build intelligence and then create a foundation for continual improvement? That's the one thing ITIL and DevOps vehemently agree on, is it's a focus on continual service improvement. But the approach on how to get there is very different. ITIL uses teams to try to reduce risk. Where DevOps wants to use data, they want to utilize this data from their monitoring capability because they recognize that the speed of change, the complexity of change, cannot be done by a human capability. In this software-defined infrastructure that we have, you could spin up an operating system, databases, applications, and interfaces in microseconds, perform thousands of business transactions, and within several minutes shut it back down. But from the human perspective, you have to produce reports, and you're using email to send it out, and Excel spreadsheets, and you're waiting for your change advisory board meeting to approve these things. That just doesn't work. We need to understand how feedback is going to be looped back in through automation, through tools, and use collaborative tools for communicating outages in real time and involving those who built and deployed as part of the troubleshooting process. In ITIL, we spent too much time trying to build these ancillary and insulation points of first tier, second tier, zero tier. But the reality is when it comes to business operations, if the developers are so far removed from the actual effect that change had, they weren't able to learn. They need to be involved. And so you have to rethink, okay, how are we logging these changes and putting these things in place? And we also need to think, well, what can we do then to support the governance and the compliance that's coming down the road? Old tools just don't work. We have to think systems, and we have to think automation tools, monitoring tools that will help us validate systems and communicate collaboratively. And that's why in many consulting organizations, they've had this expression, a fool with a tool is still a fool. I think we need to change that. I've kind of been using the expression lately that a fool without a tool is still a tool. Because really, a fool with a tool is better than a fool with a pen. I don't want someone who's just going to scribe what our issues were or write down what the process needs to be. I want a framework of automation that will consistently make the same failure that I can then tweak and see the output and adjustment. Humans are not consistent. And so we try our best to build out these processes, but the reality is that sometimes these processes actually slow us down and cause the problem to be worse. Change Advisory Board meeting is a great example of that. Change Advisory Board meetings were typically put in place to stop the hemorrhaging of changes that were happening in an environment that were causing outages and miscommunication. So a committee was put in place to say, hey, let's start putting everything through one centric standpoint that we can get our eyes on everything and then see what's happening. But what happened in reality? Because that sounds like a great idea, but what was the outcome? The outcome is that only really large changes got reviewed by the Change Advisory Board, typically at 3 o'clock on Thursdays for some reason. And then they'd only get through the top, 10, 20, maybe 30 of those changes, but there was a list of 100. The really small changes that had the lowest risk, the real small changes that could be pinpointed exactly to what was changing to what the outcome would be, never got reviewed. So what would happen? Well, then those would be bundled by the developers into more complex changes with more complexity and more risk of failure to then review by the Change Advisory Board meeting just to get the changes out the door. And in the meantime, the line of business owner who needed that functionality is pulling their hair out and looking at alternative options like getting it from the cloud or bringing in a third-party vendor that wasn't sanctioned by IT. Then IT gets upset and says, well, why do we have this shadow IT out there using this derogatory term against getting requests fulfilled? And how these requests come in, too, have also continually been very manual processes. Let's do it in a meeting. Let's set up a meeting or have emails sent around instead of focusing on an automation platform for self-service. And then how do we acquire the assets needed to fulfill that project, whether they're built or delivered or bought? Well, again, someone scribes them and they take them and they go out there and try to acquire those assets. Why aren't we using B2B connectors? Almost every provider has an interface. Amazon has it for subscribing to cloud services. Most of your large resellers have it for how you order your packages and builds and servers and software. And then when the code is actually built too, it's usually done around very manual builds. Where's the source control and how they're pulling it, and manual testing and then deploying it. But now in this new world of Chef and Puppet and SaltStack and Mesosphere and Docker, you have now capabilities where you can spin up a build environment, change a couple configuration settings and have it roll over to a test environment, apply automated testing processes for validation, and then if they're all approved, release it to production in very small controlled releases that allow you to then focus on innovation and disruption. This is vitally important because what happens is when you're still stuck on those manual processes and you're not moving towards a framework of automation, what you're basically doing is you're trying to capitalize on commoditization. That commodity that exists inside of IT will be replaced. It's inevitable. The data center services, the network infrastructure, application, even database services, they're all starting to get overly commoditized, which means that there's no real difference in the way that one organization deploys, manages, operates, fixes, or tracks, measures, plans capacity or availability around those services. They just don't. They measure for the same faults, they measure for the same security risks. So what does that mean? That means that there's organizations that can become service providers, external service providers that can be outsourced or acquired those services. Now, Nicholas Carr was a Harvard professor who wrote an article back in 2003 in the Harvard Business Review called IT Doesn't Matter. It was a very controversial piece where Nicholas Carr talked about the fact that this commodity happens from a technology perspective across many different industries. It happened with electricity, it happened with fabrication, and it's happening with IT. In 2003, he said there will come a day when most organizations will buy IT services over the internet. People didn't believe him. They said that's crazy. Back in 2003, Amazon was a bookstore. Some of you probably didn't even know they sold books. You probably only think of them as a huge cloud provider of storage, CPU, memory, compute, networking services. But that's not where they started. They moved into that because of the capability they saw they could provide, the commodity that they had built within their infrastructure, the elasticity, the on-demand services they could provide, and then they brought it to market, and they're now the largest provider of those services. In hot pursuit are companies like Azure and Google, who are trying to also provide those same levels of commoditized services, because it's just not high value. It's become inconsequential to the strategy of a business. In fact, most organizations look at it as, if I have to manage my data center or my compute or my thing, it's a risk to me. So it changes the way they focus on that. So where does this come from? How does an organization determine the fact that they're at that level of risk, that they're not providing the things in place they need to support their digital strategy? Well, a lot of it stems from knowledge management. Organizations that don't have an agile knowledge management solution get stuck in over-engineering commodity services. They over-document things and they over-focus on things that really aren't providing a whole lot of value. Many organizations, again from an ITIL perspective, have focused on producing IT service catalogs. But those IT services truly are commodity. And they don't get to the business services that the organization truly provides and mapping those back to the assets. This is a business risk, right? Because the response models and the troubleshooting and all this kind of stuff that they're putting around these commoditized services, in essence, really aren't adding a lot of value and can be outsourced at a cheaper price with less risk. The true value to an organization around their support is around those things that are more complex or more germane to the actual business they offer. So I love about standard and case. When I first was introduced this by Rob Englund, I was very impressed with the way it takes the approach. In fact, there are some things that you handle on a regular basis, but other things are truly going to be by case, and it's building that culture to support incidents when they happen. Because stuff breaks, that's life. We forget that sometimes in ITIL. We get so over-focused on, well, if we have this, the strategy and the design so perfect, the transition is going to go flawless, and then our service operation really has nothing to do but sit on the thumbs. That's bogus. Stuff's going to always break. We're always going to have these issues, and things are always changing. The complexity is only getting worse. So how do we create knowledge and sustain that knowledge? Well, again, here, this is where I love KCS. Right? Because if you look at the kind of the traditional approach to ITSM of creating knowledge articles, you get this expression that I heard from Ryan Ogilvy, which is fantastic. He called it WARN. It was write once, read never. Because by the time an article was produced and printed, it was already outdated. It didn't support. KCS kind of changes that model, right? How we capture data, elicit, keep it current, vote on it, make sure that it's validated. This really keeps the knowledge management agile and fresh, and it lets us focus on the true knowledge that is important, which is our domain of business that we're in, the competitive advantage that we bring to the table, right? So if IT is creating knowledge, and if we have people who are reviewing articles and we're trying to publish it to a self-service system, we're probably not going to be fast enough. We need to be thinking collaboration, real-time, ranked relevancy, peer knowledge, decentralized. That's the only way that we can stay current. And again, because IT is not a department, it's a competency. The best way to solve this, the best way to fix this may actually be sitting in our actuarial department if we're an insurance company, or in our call center for a customer service organization or a financial services company. Right? How we fix these issues and how we resolve business issues may not sit in IT. Even if it's an IT issue, there may be a better business resolution to it. So we need to be collaborative, right? We need to think, how are we truly agile? How are we stepping out of this kind of command and control mindset to produce capabilities faster? How do these companies get these products out to market so fast? How does Etsy do 10,000 changes a day and keep their system so fast and tuned and readily available? Well, they focus on the things that are important, right? What they've been able to do is step back and say, listen, we don't have time to categorize all the changes we have by risk. Risk needs to be decentralized to functional experts. We need to do one thing that we've had a real hard time doing in IT, which is trust our teams. The biggest risk to your organization is not whether you've not documented stuff. It's whether you trust the people doing what they need to do. I'd rather have wildly documented. I don't want widely documented failure, right? I want success, even if it's completely undocumented. Okay? Now that's not sustainable, and we get that. But if you decentralize that to the people who can actually analyze the risk, this helps. Your network engineers, if they sit in a change advisory board meeting waiting for their network change to be approved by somebody who doesn't understand how to log into an iOS and make config changes, it's frustrating, it's demoralizing, right? So we need to think of ways to decentralize that, leveraging configuration management to say, okay, what is the ownership levels? And part of that is let's not make these huge monolithic changes, or try to reduce them as much as possible. Put them into more iterative changes where you're not stacking cue balls, as the expression goes. If the only way you can truly stack cue balls is if they're perfectly round and you have them set up just right, well, that's too complex, right? We need to think of ways that we can reduce the complexity of those changes and then put them into a way to make them standardized, that we don't have to go in front of the approval board. Now, to ITIL's defense, people have misinterpreted some of the way that the change advisory board has put in place. They've misunderstood how some of these authentication approvals have put in place. But again, that's where we need to rethink, well, what is a change manager, right? If it's just that, truly it's just that role, if it's somebody who can have the authority to make that change, then let's make it clear to organizations that we trust you, but we're going to measure you. We're going to track this. We're going to relate what you do back to the success, right? And so if you think about that, well, then what are changes? Well, there's maintenance level changes, there's project level changes, but where are these changes coming from? Again, this is why I think PMO is pretty much going to be extinct in the future. We need to develop that as a competency, and changes need to be integrated with projects in such a way that it's part of our operational flow. It's not something that's distinct. It's not something that goes to an organization and says, hey, here's a value we're going to create with this project. No, here's the value we're focused on, and here's the iterative set of changes that we're going to test and market. And this is the difference in a learning organization. This is the difference that you'll see with those who are truly practicing DevOps, is that these changes are part of an operational view. They don't know. They're not expecting requirements to be lock solid in this kind of, again, waterfall methodology. There's no committee involved. What they're really focused on are these small changes that they can put as part of a total picture. And you'll hear this in some of the terms. We'll talk about epics, which is this, here's kind of chapters of this book. And then in that, that's when you have these stories that are part of this epic. They're little smaller pieces of telling the bigger picture. But instead of the book being written, we're writing the book. And we're doing it through these small sprints of code, 2-week releases. Now that doesn't mean that that's what goes out production-wise, but to some level of pilot testing, some level of validation, we're going to go out and we're going to test these smaller changes to see, did it make the right impact that we were looking for? And they're going to get the immediate validation and feedback to say, yeah, we're headed in the right direction, or they may need to pivot, right? They're thinking of ways in which the stories, as it's told by Eric Ries in the Lean Startup, they're going to find what sticks and then move the other areas as they need to. So it's not so much about being willy-nilly, or some people call it cowboy or cowgirl type mentality, that we're just going to go out there and fly by the seat of our pants. That's not the way at all. We actually want to do more validation. We want to find what works so that we can understand what is working and then focus on the things that aren't working. That's the real driver towards continual improvements. And that's why you see success of less impact, because you're able to respond quicker. You're able to roll back faster. You're able to get on top of the issue. It's not this large detangling effort, a process of elimination that you have to go through with the whole monolithic change. You have these smaller sets of change. It's just easier to get in there. So these are big drivers for the advancement of how this comes together. And again, why is this so important? Why is it so vital that we have these things broken into smaller subsets? Because we don't know what we're doing. IT is a very young industry. We're only 30, maybe 40, 50 years old at best. Listen, finance has been around for 5,000 years, okay, and they still don't have it right. So we can't put so much burden on ourselves that we're going to know exactly what IT is going to do and how technology is going to be delivered and what's going to happen. We have to be willing to learn. And so when it comes to our requirements, even when it comes to how we manage the relationship with those thought leaders in the business or those who are thinking about new business opportunities, we need to make it less structured and more collaborative, because they may not know what resources we have in IT that they could be leveraging, and we may not understand where the market direction is heading. So we need to work together. And this is why I like the new, what the Business Relationship Management Institute puts out, is this new evolving relationship back. It's not the old BRM where someone sat there and became the whipping child for everything that went wrong in IT, but rather it was someone who could truly understand IT's capabilities and have business conversations with where the business is going. And they focus less on agreements. And they even kind of shy away from service level agreements internally. Now, it's important to have those with your external providers because they're not part of your company, and you are a customer to them, and you have to get what you pay for. But internally, again, they're not your customer. They're your business partner. So let's set our targets. Let's focus on those. Right? And then that makes it easier to measure, and that makes it easier to have our tools start to define things for us. Because with all these changes and all these collaborative teams working together, there's a ton of data there that we can then analyze. And we can analyze and learn from that. And it's through testing and trial that we'll find out what truly is going to work for us. So instead of spending weeks or months trying to define our critical success factors and our key performance indicators, and again, I'm not saying that stuff is wrong. I'm just saying when it comes to a new area of your business where you're trying to disrupt a market or working with a marketing team or trying to create something for sales, that speak is going to kill you. That's why they're going to go buy something from the cloud. Or that's why they're not going to involve you in their cloud decision or sanction their provider through you. Because you're focused on these surveys and meetings and requirements, and they just want to understand, well, listen, here's our targets. Let's go figure it out. Let's go learn. So focus more on analytics. Figure out how you're providing feedback loops. Here's a question for you. On your self-service system that you spend so much time in your ITIL deployment, do you run Google Analytics? Do you know what your bounce rate is on your knowledge base? Do you know what your bounce rate is on your self-service request catalog? See, if you don't have the foundations of understanding analytics internally with your own capabilities that you're trying to provide to the organization, what makes you think that you're going to be the trusted partner, or trusted provider to go help them do that to the external customer? You're not. And I don't mean to be mean by that. What I'm saying to you is you're stuck into this mentality that somehow this flow of IT delivery works. And it just doesn't. It's too complex. There's too many things here. So what's the new model for us? How do we have to look at it? Well, when it comes to understanding the way that IT works, it truly comes back to the business services. Having that enterprise service model of business services as your centric point. Relating the business services together to vital business functions, relating them together to the assets that we're managing and deploying and creating and supporting, helps then sustain for us the enterprise knowledge that we need in the services health system that both development and operations can collaboratively work together off of. We are not going to unify our teams by teaching them ITIL speak. Now, I would love every developer to go through ITIL Foundation. I would love every developer to have the books accessible to them and read from them, because it provides with us a wealth of information about the concepts and the speak and the language and the understanding and why the things that we do what we do happen and why we are going to have to consider them. But we really need to unify development and operations on is the business outcome. What we really need to be speaking internally in IT on a common language about is what this business does, how this business operates. what this government department does, what this nonprofit organization's mission is. Why do we come together either virtually or in the office every single day and work for the same persons for? That's the language we need to kind of come together on. And then when it comes into IT, we'll figure some of the other stuff out. But that's what is vitally important for us to start thinking about. We're not just stabilizing IT. We're not going to create this perfect world. We're then going to surf the next 5 years of this wave of operational excellence we're creating. It's not going to happen. Things change. We're going to continue to see changes within the environment. If we don't plan today on how we support innovation, we will be gone tomorrow. If we don't plan today how changes are going to happen with our business model and how we're going to support an innovative, disruptive business model, we will be gone tomorrow. That's why we have to think about innovation management as part of our strategy. How are we truly understanding demand? Where can people freely talk about ideation? Where are challenges to the way that we do things openly addressed and accessible to everybody to review and comment on? And how is validation truly happening within our environment? Where are our feedback loops? If enterprise architecture and project management and development and operations are separate groups, we will never truly provide a platform for integration that's going to allow us to stabilize our operations, provide a foundation of operational excellence that will help us sustain the business we support, and then utilize true data intelligence and analytics to understand what are the innovation opportunities that exist within our business realm, in our business domain, and how can we be disruptive? How can we leverage IT as a disruptive market innovator? Because I assure you today that your CEO's digital strategy conversations are about that. And if your CIO is talking about cost control and talking about improved decision making, those are very far down the list of the CEO digital strategy agenda. The CMO is talking about growth, creating new customer experiences. That's at the top of that CEO's digital strategy agenda. So as a service management professional who has chosen to take their service management skills and focus them on the IT area, which is a great place to focus it, because IT is the business. There's not an organization that runs without IT. And if they do, they're not going to be running much longer. So we have to think of ways in which we're supporting that innovation strategy, right? We have to think about how we're using the skills we have, which are great skills that we've learned from ITIL and other books. How do we take that to the next level, right? How do we get that to the next level? That's what we need to be thinking about. So I'm going to take a break here, and I thank you for your time. I'm going to look quickly to see if there's been any questions from the audience. If you have any further questions, we have just a few minutes here if you want to go ahead and ask a question. Meanwhile, while those are coming in, I want to encourage you to take the opportunity to read a few books that have helped me significantly. There is The Lean Enterprise by Jez Humble. It is a book that systematically goes through the comparison of the Toyota way, the Toyota production systems thinking, and how we need to look at failure from a different perspective than we traditionally have, that failure is inevitable. We need to plan for failure. We need to create a culture that embraces failure and is willing to learn from failure. Understand those concepts from TPS and apply it to the building of services and product from a technology perspective. Another great book that I read, and I mentioned it earlier, was The Lean Startup by Eric Ries. I love this book because it helps you to think that, listen, we don't always know what's going to happen. And as a startup, you have an idea, you have a market that you want to go in. And I happened to personally read that book when I had my software startup. I had this vision of where the market was going to go. I had a vision of what the technology should provide for people as a benefit. And I immediately went out and built a team, and we started to create the product, and we weren't getting the traction that we wanted. People weren't adopting our product. Someone recommended Eric's book to me. And in the book, there was a particular chapter where he talked about, let's say that you wanted to craft a letter. How would you go through crafting that letter? Well, most of us would proofread it, we'd type up a letter, we'd fold them all up together, and then we'd stuff the envelope, and at the end we'd put stamps on them, put labels on them, and we'd ship them out. And that would be kind of our linear process. And the question it kind of gets you thinking about is, what if your messaging was wrong? What if the proposition that you put in your letter wasn't really working? So for instance, if you're in a neighborhood and you wanted to put a dog park in place, let's say that the messaging you put in place is, hey everybody, we're all sick and tired of having dog poop on our lawn. Let's have a dog park so that we can have everybody bring their dogs there. That messaging may not appeal to people who actually have dogs, who have not let their dogs poop on other people's lawn, right? So you want to test that market. Better to put out 25 and see how people respond to it, and then you can adjust appropriately to the next 50 and then to the next 100. And as you're getting the response you're looking for, you now validated, okay, this is the message. We need to have two. We need to have one, hey, dog lovers, here's a great place for you to go and let your dogs have a play date. And then, hey, people who don't have dogs, here's a better way to keep our lawns more sanitary. And now you can go full force in sticking to what you validated works. That's that pivot mentality. A couple questions have come in is, how can ITIL frameworks be leveraged for DevOps? I think it's a great question. There are the concepts that most are applicable to DevOps is continual service improvement. Right? We have to focus on the fact that while ITIL gives us the aspects of that, yeah, we need a strategy, we need to create things are always going to be changing, and then we need to support things, so you have design, strategy, design, transition, operations, but those are not the real focal points. What it is how do we improve? How do we loop back into strategy? Where's the feedback loop, right? So I think that's the biggest benefit you get from the ITIL framework. Another question is, how can traditional IT organizations effectively transition from ITIL to DevOps? Love this question. Here's my personal response. You don't transition, right? It's about cultural thinking. Change the language. Change the focus. Forget ITIL, forget DevOps. Those are buzzwords, and it's going to change. Focus on one thing that's not going to change, is that your organization has to have a digital strategy, and that you will all need to work more collaboratively together, right? So find areas where we're using the word customer internally. Start to dispel that. Find areas where knowledge is not being promoted fast enough and dispel that. Where does agile practices sit in this picture? I assume it leans more towards DevOps, and maybe it's another name for it. Listen, agility is just about making faster decisions. So you can use a lot of the ITIL processes you have, but find ways to eliminate the physical. Stop having meetings to review things. Allow systems to analyze the risk for you. Try to leverage a framework of automation, as I mentioned. That's where you're going to get the agility. Let the data make your decision. How can, let's see, we've got one more question in here. How can traditional IT organizations effectively transition from ITIL to DevOps? It's a very similar question. So yeah, it's not about transitioning from one to the other, like you're going to flip a switch. What you want to start doing is set the precedent. So another read I would recommend for you is Kim Stevenson, who is the CIO of Intel. She has this mindset that we don't do IT projects, we do business projects. We are not here as an IT service provider. IT is the business. So read her Intel Annual Performance IT Report. The 2015 Performance Report is a great read to see how she's positioning her organization. That's going to set the tone for your culture. Right? That's going to help you get to the next level. So there's only about 30 seconds here. More questions have come in. I appreciate those questions. My contact information is here for you. You can follow me at Twitter at VigilantGuy. My blog is vigilantguy.com. You can certainly email me at matthooper@landesks.com. Thank you so much for your attendance today, and I hope that this was beneficial for you. I look forward to meeting any of you at future ITSM or DevOps conferences. But thank you so much for your time today.